Welcome, everybody. It's great to see some familiar faces. I'm glad we've got not only David Saxby here from Zero Zero Architects, but I think we've got some members of his team as well. So I'm hoping that we'll have a bit of an interactive talk here with some members of his team too. Anyway, it's Friday. Thank God it's Friday is all I can say. I've maxed this week, so this is just a treat to sort of finish off the week. And I thought actually the main thing that I was thinking about this week was why architecture is important to me. And I had a discussion with a colleague at Now Gallery and I kind of banged on about it, but I really think it's important. I suddenly realized that the reason that, apart from the fact that my mother is an architect, is also that kind of architecture surrounds us. It's our homes and it's our schools and it's our supermarkets and it's our museums. And I suppose I feel it's similar in a way to fashion in that we, at Now Gallery, we curate show fashion exhibitions with fashion designers, and fashion is kind of who you are. It kind of sits on you and it makes a statement. But the thing about houses is, or architecture is, that it houses us and it holds us and it keeps us safe. And you can't really get away from architecture. So this is why I was so pleased to host these talks and to really have time to consider the 16 significant buildings that are being designed by 8 architects. And I really feel that the architects that I've been able to talk to, they've been given space to make working life better. And that is a really exciting thing for all of us now stuck at home. We need spaces that really work for us. So that was my kind of first thought. And then I realized that someone very kindly at work told me that the exhibition we've got at Now Gallery on Greenwich Peninsula, next door to the Design District, is the first we've had all year, which I'm like, it's October. How have we got to this point? So I just wanted to tell you about it because it's important for us, for you to realise that Greenwich Peninsula really is so keen on a cultural element in its existence. And we've got this exhibition called Secret 7, and it's 700 7-inch sleeves designed by architects and designers, and it's a total joy. And if you want to come, you can book really easily. It's very easy on Eventbrite. Just go through to Now Gallery website. And for me, I've just found that the only thing I can do right now, apart from visit beautiful buildings, is also to go to galleries. And I really recommend this show because it's everybody from the team will say it's really beautiful diminutive drawings, and they're just a pleasure to see. So please come down and you can see the Design District literally coming together before your eyes, which for us is really exciting because it means we know that we've got this amazing place coming to us. So, sorry, David, I've totally hijacked your talk, but I just had to say that. And I also had to say that I've talked to 7 architects and they've all been really different. And I actually realized that I haven't asked the same question twice because there's no need, because they all have their own philosophy, their own take on their practice and on designing buildings. So this is, sadly, I'm really sad about this, the last practice I'm going to be talking to, bar HNNA, who I'll be talking to in 2 weeks' time, but I've talked to Hannah before and I'm looking forward to talking with her about her 2 buildings this time. But we have 00 architects today. David, hello, lovely to see you, and thank you very much for coming. We had a discussion, David and I, about how 00 architect could actually sort of manifest itself in one man. And I hope you're going to talk a little bit about that and how you said you were definitely the whitest, malest person, and that wasn't necessarily a good description of what 00 Architects is about. So I really hope that you, as a collective, will somehow be able to explain your practice. So I'm looking forward to that. I think that everybody probably knows by now, but we want everybody to get involved and we want people to ask questions. We feel that this is an important place for people to have an opportunity to really speak to some amazing architects. So please get on the chat, tell us what you think. We want you to get involved. And what we're going to do, as usual, is David Saxby has got he's got some images, and I'm going to ask about 8 questions, and we're just going to kind of have an informal chat, I hope. So David, if you want to share your screen, that would be brilliant. And we can start looking at you've got way too many images. And as everybody knows who's been on these talks before, I'm very strict about it. So if you're not going through, fast enough, I'm going to.
Yeah, you can hurry me all you like.
This is Friday heaven for me. So on my first, just because I've seen it happening before my eyes, you've actually got a basketball court on your building, and I know that you're really interested in making buildings available for everybody, which I totally think is such a good idea. And I wondered if you could run with that. Where does this philosophy come from?
Well, it's thank you everyone, and good afternoon. I'm glad you didn't ask why 00. That's usually the first question, but in an indirect way you have asked it. The studio was set up in 2005 as what we call a platform. We've used various terms, an infrastructure, a substructure, but in the same spirit as our buildings, it's a place where hopefully people can flourish. Actually, how does the way we work, the way we operate, the buildings we design support people to achieve most through collaborating with each other? I say, if we could all do it alone, we wouldn't need to convene, we wouldn't need places to convene, and we wouldn't need a structure ourselves. We wouldn't need a structure like 00. So again, linking that to your earlier point, 00 is a very diverse, multidisciplinary studio space. I'm keen to use the word studio when I talk about where we actually work. It's not an office. There we go, helpfully, the first slide. That's very similar to what's exactly behind me. And it is a place that brings together sort of curious minds from multidisciplinary backgrounds. There was a moment where I could comfortably say over half of our team are trained in architecture. And often I think that might be the best route, train in architecture, then go and do something much more interesting. But now increasingly, we've got people from very diverse backgrounds who work with us, which has sometimes made it difficult for the architectural profession to kind of frame what we do. And it's therefore always kind of great as an opportunity to deliver a building, because a building in a way is a manifesto, and it's incontrovertible, it is a thing. And sessions like this and the design district, where we can compare how we would conceive a building compared to 7 other very talented architects, has been a real opportunity. So I think you'll find, Jemima, today that, reining me in, because I can sort of ramble and expand on points sort of ad infinitum, but...
You're going to have to go through your images quicker than you are already. I've counted them, and I know the time, so you're going to have to like...
Yeah, so I won't, I don't want to sit and give a narrative. I want you to quiz me and stop me, but it says our early work has been even doing research, people like Nestor and Cabe, about what makes a civic economy, what makes place. We've written books about sort of self-build housing and how we actually can empower a real democracy of shaping the world we live in. And I say, in some ways, these aren't radical ideas. These are somewhat conservative ideas. 1961, Jane Jacobs' Life and Death of Great American Cities. The whole philosophy comes from architecture is in support of something, and that's in support of us as individuals, us as a community or a society, and is that thing we rely on. It does have capacity to actually sort of transpose ourselves in the way we behave. And yes, if that includes basketball, there we go, segue right the way round. That's one of the affordances, one of the opportunities that a building can give. And as the design district, I think that was partly what we were asked to do, to respond to actually a very narrow brief, which is in a good way. Efficiencies, areas, budgets, a very strong master plan by Hannah and Peter, and then sort of carve out all those other preoccupations And say, given the philosophy I've sort of touched on there.
I wondered if you could point out because actually, if I was looking at this and didn't know, which are your buildings?
We have a building called C1. We enjoy that, which is here at the front of the site, and a building.
And that's where the basketball, so the gallery is just over to the left, and we can see that. I'm planning on playing, regularly.
Your gallery.
Yeah.
The court. And our second building is D1, which is actually a more discreet, but I think equally interesting building that I might leave that to be discovered when it's finished, because the two of them, one has a more sort of, I'd say, extrovert character, and one has a slightly more introverted character. They're a family, and they've been developed across the team in the studio with many similarities, but I think actually in their personalities there is a difference. Here again, just go through
that is a question I sometimes ask, is, are they siblings? Are they friends? Are they, are they, what relation do they have? Because is it very unusual to design two buildings in the same place like this?
I think it is. I think the whole design district is quite extraordinary, and actually I have a lot of faith in it. I think the integrity that every building has been developed across the 8 architects and the strength of the master plan will mean it's not just a zoo. I think there's a real sort of actually critical narrative in there, and the comparing and contrasting buildings between architects, and then even actually between architects' own responses to a brief, I think is fascinating. I'd say ours are definitely siblings. They've got the same DNA, the shared values that our studio holds, but both through actually their response to the site, and actually I think say a little bit of even the individuals involved, they express different characteristics. So that's something to enjoy. There we go. This is, say, the more extroverted C1, where we very literally took the brief, which is all about efficiency of internal space, and said, can we stick everything that doesn't have to be inside on the outside? And
well, now what I want to say about it, because I walked around this probably about a month ago, and what's weird is I didn't even notice that the corridors were on the outside. I mean, it didn't feel counterintuitive at all. And I think, as Matt described it, he said that in a way it gives you your own front door. So it means that each studio has a sense of its own kind of autonomy.
Yeah, and I think those thresholds, how we privately meet the public, that they're all actually places of real potential. And by putting things on the outside, we're giving to the public realm as much as actually making economies in our own planning. So we particularly sort of thought the design district was that opportunity, because we'll get on to the discussions about buildings sit hand in glove with the communities who occupy them. And a lot of our work, possibly not through explicit choice, has ended up working very closely with communities on their spaces. Actually, sort of, yes, giving the sort of the building is that platform, it's that bridge, it's where people do come together. I say it, and the design district being targeted at creative people who we could trust can pick up that sort of gauntlet. If this was full of accountants, you might say, well, really relying on them to be your facade might be a risky strategy.
But also, they might not want to go outside to go to the toilet. I think that's another thing. You're making people kind of work for the space in some way, which I think is good.
A lot of our narrative in our buildings, and we'll get on to tectonics, is about permissiveness. Can we make a building where people feel that they're empowered to do? And if that's spray paint or nail something to the wall or do something extraordinary, can they feel that actually it's permitted? The danger is if you don't have people who are going to kind of be bold enough to take those opportunities, you could just be left with the bare walls. Here, the external decks, hopefully someone will see an opportunity we ourselves haven't seen and really kind of just say, well, it's a building that, here we go, that fits well. A building that just allows us to express ourselves.
Which, yeah, I think that it's about, I mean, I think what's slightly interesting, which I was thinking about, is the fact that you don't have a community to work with. So it's not like you're going out there and asking people what would your ideal building be. And I think the thing that I've been really aware of doing these talks is the relationship between, you know, does architecture, is it a function for people, or is it a function for, to put it meanly, architects' egos? And how do you balance those? Because you want the brilliance of architects, you want that kind of forward-thinking, extravagant, sort of extraordinary vision, but you also want a building that isn't going to kind of trip you up.
Yeah, and I'd say I don't know what slides are coming here. There's
Yeah.
various narrative, but actually this slide, I'll just say we're firmly vested down in here, sort of for the many. That there is a sort of almost classical architecture, which is a very refined sort of discipline for those who can afford it. It can be very beautifully sculpted, it can be very expensive, it can be in the service of one person and their own particular wishes, aspirations. Or there's an architecture which is about trying to find the sort of the maximum sort of potential for the many. Say, this is a slight sort of to one side. A lot of our projects have been about enabling those open source communities. This is a project called Open Desk, where actually it's distributed manufacturing of furniture, open source sharing of files. If you want to give it a go, you make it yourself. I'll skip that one. Interestingly, it's converted into projects like this, where a local community delivered for the local authority a large furniture package for a project. And actually through the design, we unlocked the training, the local sort of currency moving through local hands and pockets. And actually that's a design decision. We've got a version of that builds it up into actually full-scale buildings under the Wiki House, and say creating very simple high-performance structures. And we can mention sort of actually they're being used. That's here east on the Olympic Park, where 20 of these were built as creative studio spaces.
So these I found fascinating because it was, if you wouldn't mind going back to, are you able to? Yeah. That, I think that whole idea of coming to a piece of architecture that's already there and inserting something which is going to work for people. I thought that was rather ingenious. What do people feel about the buildings?
Well, I say credit here. This was Hawkins Brown as the master planners, architects as the master planners of the Here East, and the gantry on the side of the building was what held the air conditioning for the TV studios during the Olympics. We thought it was one of the most extraordinary bits of infrastructure on that site, and original plans to have it removed. Here East Hawkins Brown managed to say, no, it's got potential. And it almost is an architecture 0-0 building, just the steel framework, and the roles were reversed. We were asked to help sort of inhabit that and a word we use a lot, platform. And so sort of almost I read this as both the kind of strategy of a 0-0, let's create capacity by building this extraordinary steel framework, but then actually the appropriation of it, the inhabitation of it. And we probably place more trust in those to come after us to do that. Actually, we don't, as architects, need to control the finality of a project. We just need to create the opportunities for others to pick up the mantle and run.
So I don't really understand what that means. Are you saying that these buildings aren't going to last forever? We don't know what's going to happen to them.
Well, these buildings, they will then have creative communities move into them, and the spaces between the buildings are left open, and hopefully the inhabitation of those will take on its character. Actually, for more external spaces, is whether that's for making or recreation. But yes, in theory, these buildings themselves could be removed, and you're left with, again, the infrastructure of this big steel frame, and it could be converted, used again. So I'm not advocating that the design district buildings are too quickly repurposed, but in a small way they will be. As you said, we don't know the end users, but actually in the long term, maybe such infrastructure, this durable infrastructure it could become something very different. And there's something open-ended and exciting for us in that, rather than actually deterministic in saying, no, our architecture is sort of, you can't violate it, you can't change it.
But I also think that must be something fascinating about being an architect, to imagine, you know, what the bank then became a nightclub, then became something else. And, you know, do you design literally thinking, oh, it's going to be 10 years, or do you design, I mean, how does that work?
I think this could be a very contemporary phenomenon. Sort of previously, people did probably build buildings and think they were eternal, certainly cathedrals and many historic buildings of the past. Its society has become so kind of fast moving that yes, we have buildings on the drawing board now where we cannot say by the time they're built whether what the client intended is going to be the final use. That could be sort of a form of paralysis. How can I commit to anything if I don't know what I was designing for is still going to exist in 3 years' time? But it also makes us reflect on, okay, our approach to design has to build in that sort of contingency, a sort of a liminality to whatever use might come on day one. Will probably be different in year 5 and in year 10 and in year 20. So it's sort of led us, I think, to design this probably 2 layers of strategy. One is a very durable, infrastructural kind of just creating a spatial potential, and then 2, a very tactical, smaller scale, which is how then people interface with that building in the now. And I say some of the Lynton on our team and Will on our team say there's a great subtlety that they bring to the moments of interaction in the buildings. And I say they're more contingent, that they might persist, they might.
So this building, I think, is, I mean, I think that all you said about the relationship in a way between people and buildings is so interesting. And this one, I imagine you had to do some research in terms of how it would work. And I'm curious about that. But also I've got, the question I've got here is, should architecture respond to issues of high levels of unemployment and economic decline? I can't actually remember where that came from, but I'm sure it has to do with this building sometimes. And also I'm sure we're going to see a detail of this building, but I was really interested in the idea of perforation, and the idea that perforation somehow, it makes you see this, the sort of the wrap of the building, but then also makes you see through the building in a very interesting way. And I believe that how you've used that perforated has an element that relates to how the building is used. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, say that this is actually a local enterprise centre. So there we go. There's a connection to your question, but probably some of the points I was making earlier, that buildings are part of that sort of local economy, both in the activities they host and actually then how they come about. The capital cost invested in making anything is probably one of the biggest sort of to an area that happens in a generation. So unlocking how a building is made to actually create employment and opportunity is something we're very interested in, localizing supply chains. This building up in Sheffield, as I say, was about supporting actually the transition from community and voluntary business through to enterprise. It was a government funded and local authority funded sort of step, and across a hillside, we have a community space at the middle. We have in the middle, the first floor of the building, which actually is ground floor to the rear, a set of workshops, and then on the top floor, which links to the side of the hill at the far end of the building, office spaces. And part of the strategy where there's been actually generational unemployment was to engage people in the community and show them the pathways into enterprise, local enterprise and employment. The building on day one is quite a sort of an intervention on the edge of a local park. I think windows were shot out with an air rifle. There'd been quite high levels of antisocial behaviour. So quite deliberately with the client, we said it's a bold statement on day one, but over time we wanted it to actually become part of the community. So this sort of perforated aluminium facade. Rocks were thrown at the building and they bounced off without leaving too many scratches and dents. And then we planted around the base of it, I think 2014, actually growing, and slowly the plants are growing over the building. So actually the architecture there was partly the transition from being new and bold and in some ways having to be self-defensive into just becoming part of that place and creating an opportunity for local people to have a relationship with it. So again, a lot of our projects are in the choices of materials. It's not just their simple sort of beguiling nature. It's actually how do they perform a role of bridging? How do they actually create an interaction, sometimes just between the person and the building, then sometimes is it hosting an interaction between a person and another person in those moments.
But also I feel like materials are, I mean, your signature is probably, because inevitably as an architect your materials are going to be your signature, but it does seem that you are using concrete, or you use it in a very particular way, and also celebrating it. But yeah, tell us a bit more about the materials here.
Yeah, this is the inside of that building, and it's a very simple palette, a very, again, cost-effective building. There's very little sort of lavished on it just for the sake of finishing. So possibly that those comments on infrastructure, we see the building as very sort of not quite utilitarian, but actually everything is there to perform a function. Clearly, it's very edited down to clarify the communication of that. Say lots of things are concealed, so actually that elemental layering can be read. But also it's about its durability. It's just simple, it's robust, and it's a sort of a three-dimensional opportunity for then the inhabitation. This particular thing, you can see where the kind of the concrete is sort of lined with slightly more tactile materials, just where people will sort of more closely interact with it. So this is actually a similar project, a sister to that one, where again we had a very sort of bleak assessment by the architectural liaison officer for the local police force about security. So we took effectively a whole facade of security shutters and turned it into somewhat kinetic kind of arrangement of perforated shutters that worked both for security, both also an expression of when the building closing down at night across the different users, and also part of the environmental strategy. It worked as the solar shading. But what I wanted to just robust or minimal interiors, the users come along and then it's a joy. You can't quite see it in this photo, but the walls are sort of splattered in paint and layers of paint, and the floor was kind of just, yeah, a technicolor tapestry of things. The permissiveness that the artist said, I don't feel constrained by the architecture. Here's a similar one, that the concrete, again, the same palette. This is down in Vauxhall. That little step on the left-hand side there, we didn't tell the client what it was just there. And actually that invitation was all they needed. And suddenly we get a band. We then get that same space suddenly filled up with a performance by a local school. We get people hosting lunches in it. This is effectively an extended bit of circulation at the one end of an atrium, but actually just by framing it with the sink and somewhere to prepare a lunch, but it turns.
That's it, I suppose. That's the question which I have here, which is, do you go back, and do you go back to your buildings? I mean, obviously, I love the idea of the plants climbing up the perforated steel, but is it part of what you are as to see if they work? And do you do it in 10 years time, and how does that kind of fit into your practice? And there was another question I have here, which is like learning from the past. So I was curious about the Here East buildings. Did you did they inform the design district in some way? Because obviously they were designing for creatives. How do you go back and learn?
Yeah, we do, and our Here East buildings are possibly the third generation of a line of thought. And I say we're working on a subsequent generation, and we're feeling some cement guilt. So we're looking that actually in a very architectural way, how can we translate this now into, let's say, timber constructions? But yes, we do return to our buildings, not through an exercise of post-occupancy appraisal, but probably the strength of the relationships we build with our clients. As I say, many of them are communities of sorts. And so actually the building, you deliver a building for them, but actually then this particular building, the Foundry, the building manager must take credit for actually the joy that actually sort of then springs up in the spaces. For a little while, the decks and terraces, this building has, say, not quite a basketball court, but a large outside area. They weren't coming to life. No one from a management perspective, and then suddenly a new building manager, she got it and actually started to curate what the opportunities were there. And sorry, let's go back. And when we finished the building, there was the usual set of very sort of reduced architectural photos. There was a very nice write-up by Ellis Woodman, the journalist, and he recognized there was a generosity in the spirit of the design, that invitation. And he said, only time will tell whether that sort of is misplaced trust. And credit to him, there was a short period where we wondered whether it would come to life in the way we wanted. And then suddenly, yes, a spark, going back to our work on things like the civic economy, it often is a single person or a small group who kind of actually initiate. And
but
you're away.
I think it's also the interesting. I remember I worked at the Architecture Foundation, and the whole idea of going out into communities and asking them what they want. What they want wasn't necessarily what they need. What they needed wasn't necessarily what they want. It's it's very hard to ask the right questions. And is it easier? I mean, I'm interested in the idea of the kind of the generous architect. That's a really interesting term, but how do you exactly give? I mean, I love the slide where someone is, they've given that, somehow they've been given a blank canvas, and I think that, I think we talk a little bit about the ego of the architect, but can you give a blank canvas so people can feel really comfortable? I'm just going to say one thing: please do ask questions. I don't think we've had any questions so far from the audience. That may not be true, and Alex is going to be reading out them at the end, so please, we'd love questions from you, because my knowledge is limited, so we need your knowledge, because I'm sure we've got lots of fantastic architects who can give David a run for his money. But sorry, generous architects?
Well, somewhat flippantly, rhetorically, and possibly of interest for a practice who has actually a specialist team who do participation with communities, I often open presentations by saying we don't do consultation. If you're going to engage with a community, I think it needs to be a process of giving as much as taking. You don't just go and ask them for all their opinions. So we try to actually, when we're working with the community, to ask them to participate. And through that, what we can give is, and what we try to give, is capacity building, because unless you can build a community's capacity to take advantage of the opportunities you deliver for them, you can't hope that your visions for how the building might be used come to life. So I think you have to invest with communities and build the capacity, so when you hand it over, and there is always a rather extraordinary moment where technically the building is complete and your final fee invoice is submitted and you have no formal engagement with them. To have sort of hope that all your dreams are realized, you need to know that they're ready for it. let's skip through a few more slides. I say another generation of the design district thinking is something we've just secured planning consent for with the City Council down in Swansea. Very similar things. And also
can we just check, those are renders?
These are renders.
Right. And again, it's something I'm always fascinated with, this sort of the idea of the fantasy and then the reality. It will look like that because now you can be that accurate. And this is a layperson speaking here.
Yeah. Which is, say, as an aside, always slightly disappointing because sort of buildings being built is like Christmas unwrapping presents. Now virtual reality and CGIs are so good. Sometimes it's kind of, yes, it's just as I expected it. Perhaps better than when buildings are built and clients often say, I never imagined it would be like this. And you would say, well, my communication has failed for the last 3 years. But say similar, you can see our same strategies, that learning from building to building. This project in South Wales has a very interesting agenda about green infrastructure in the city and sustainable drainage. The council have very high targets, and so there's a new generation here of sort of environmental performance. These aren't just pleasant looking amenity spaces, they're actually really performatively working with the local drainage systems. I'm going to skip through a few of these.
Because I think that's another, you've got to go back a bit because we need to talk about your collaboration, but I think that's interesting, the idea of, I mean, it's one thing, sustainable architecture. I mean, it's what we want. We want sustainable architecture. And just as you're saying about feeling, is concrete the right material? How do we do that in an effective way? And absolutely, we can plant some trees. And
I think, so our take on it would be that there can't be sort of sustainable architecture that somehow is a panacea and allows us to behave in whatever way we want. Sustainability is going to be about our human actions, and the architecture is actually what maybe enables us to act more responsibly, or in the sort of now slightly discredited world of sort of behavioral economics and nudge theory. Unfortunately, it was co-opted by the government in a rather clumsy way. Can we kind of create an architecture that preferences the right thing? It's not being sort of high-handed and didactic and telling people what to do, but it actually helps people and says, well, this makes doing the right thing just that little bit easier. So I
pick you up there because I don't understand what you're saying. I mean, didactic. I mean, how do you have people walk into a building? They go in a lift. They go upstairs. They go somewhere.
If you could walk into a building and see the stairs and see something at the top of the stairs that you wanted to get to, you're more likely to use the stairs. Many buildings, the first thing you encounter is the lifts. Right. Simply in architecture, preferencing the sustainable choice, making it easier to go up the stairs rather than finding them tucked around a sort of service corridor than queuing for a lift, is that sort of preferencing that I talk about. And you're right, we are in a sort of fairly rarefied world of jargon and design professionals. Most people just walk into a building and experience it. And so I think our communication doesn't need sort of rhetoric. It just needs to be obvious to someone in that space. And
I don't know, I really like signifiers. I really, that's great. I love the idea of walking in and seeing stairs and not seeing elevators. I think that's that interests me. I mean, I think just as much as, having iconic columns on the outside of a building and it signifies it's a library, I think that, there are sort of bits that you can, like having perforated steel or whatever it is, it sort of symbolizes things to people.
Yeah. So, but I think they both kind of underpin, I say, this symbiotic relationship of buildings and people, and going back to sort of 0, and the multidisciplinary kind of nature of us. It is that architecture sort of in isolation I think it has a phenomenological, it has a power to it, but actually it's the reciprocal behaviors of people and how we design to actually sort of recognize the human behavior and support it. And I know that in some ways is a political statement, and so long were architects tarnished with a brush of social engineering. Well, I think if you deny the fact that that's what architecture does, you're proceeding blindly. We have to stand by a set of values, and say I'm happy to talk about the values that sort of 00 share, some of those key things about sort of the humanism, the democracy of it. And I say our architecture tries to actually sort of support, yes, the potential of people to take that ownership and to express themselves and to enable them, rather than an architecture that in some ways is about the control of the architecture.
Yeah, I think, yeah, the control of the architecture is an interesting idea. Now, what I think we're going to do, because we've got a little bit of time left, is we're going to talk about collaboration. Yeah, this looks great. I thought we'd get Lynton. Lynton, can you come off mute so that we've got another voice from you? Because I feel like as a collective, it's really important that, oh, he's disappeared now. He's just left. He's left the building. He obviously really doesn't want to, but I just feel that, oh, here he is. You do actually work in the same office. I'm glad to see that. Oh, are you taking over now? Is that it?
We're socially distancing in small rooms.
Oh God, of course I'd forgotten that we had to do that. I mean, as I said, we generally don't talk about COVID at all because it's just too exhausting, and everybody discusses it too much. So now Lynton has become David. So tell us where you come from in the practice. And tell us a little. Sort of my question now was really about the fact that you started off as 00 projects. Is that right? And you work with Hatto. And I'm curious to find out a bit more. And what is this slide? Where's this?
Oh, this building.
Yeah.
This is the Social Justice Centre in Vauxhall. And this building we did 5 years ago. That's the one that Dave was showing the decks on, and like this was our first kind of experimentation in like creating a building which allow people to feel like they could take ownership of it. So that's why all the decks are exposed. They're just like shelves which you can put things on. So much like the Here East subsequent building, it's a thing which can keep growing. And there's a lot of ideas around this about inviting people in, like making the thresholds very deep in the building so public can use it. And then it's got a lot of ideas in this building, like the external decks being used by the public. So the building is never closed. So you kind of get this ownership throughout the building and like this interaction with the public. And talking about, what are you doing? Oh yeah, so the reason why these buildings look like this is because they do work very hard. So like all the materials, like for example, that's just like a soft wood on some MDF for the external balustrading, is to keep the costs very low, because we were very aware of like the build costs affecting rental costs. So this was a £1,050 per square metre construction cost, which is extremely low, but it provides so much more. So on the same budget, which on our brief, which was asked to just provide some office space, we managed to make this into an actual sort of community and sort of worldwide centre for the Social Justice Centre.
And I mean, just on an aesthetic level, I'm really enjoying the kind of soft wood and the hard concrete floors and the light. I mean, again, that is something that comes up again and again, is that light is so important in architecture, and how you think about where your light. I mean, if you're designing a whole thing, you've got to think about which light's coming in, east, west.
Yeah.
How to do that?
But like this plays into like the facade. The reason why it's all angled is because the glass on a north-south orientation, which means that the glass heats up rather than the building. Like every single part of this building has multiple reasons of why it is. So for example, like the staggered decks means that you can talk between floors, and also you kind of slightly coerce how people use the building. So if you want people to not linger in a space, like one of these decks, you don't put PowerPoints there, which means that that's a battery life of your laptop type space, which means you can sit there and get people to walk past. Or if you want to just sit there and do something quieter, you go to the next floor up, which has more PowerPoints, which means that you can just...
Which is anybody who's had any, work done in their house, where the one thing you regret is not putting enough sockets in. And the one thing you regret...
To make it a transitory space, so people can't actually sort of stay there too long. But yeah, so there's, and also like on this building where the internal glazing is massive, that's to create views from the internal rooms through to the courtyard, through those spaces, so people connect with each other. But also means that, like in our other workspaces where people used to like wall newspaper up their windows, you'll be a bit crazy to do that because it's such a large piece of glass.
That's what I was just thinking of that. I was thinking of, is it Dennis Lasdon's Pimlico School? And that actually it's a bloody nightmare because it's all glass and it's, I'm sure it might be north facing, but still it gets incredibly hot. Yeah. And that, you know, you have to make sure that that is north facing, otherwise you're going to be frying people.
Like in this building, like the existing building is massive, thermally massive existing building. Which provides cool to this side of the building. And then during winter, this side is highly glazed and provides warmth to the other side of the building. So that everything is like tied together through the mechanical systems, and like the glazing is sort of set there by a clever fire strategy. Like it's all these like things you don't think about, but allow you to create something very effective and very cost effective.
But I think what's interesting there, and say we're slightly off script, running ahead of slides and things, so apologies Jemima, but your question of the project 00, I think Lynton's just articulated this philosophy that in a world of such complexity, no one person is going to have the skills and perspectives to do everything. So the 00 team has many disciplines, and the baton is passed between them. Lynton, say, we're very lucky to have a number of extraordinary architects who share the values but can express them through the detail of the making. At the other end, Indy, one of the co-founders of 00, now runs Dark Matter Labs team, which is working with actually governments at the kind of underpinning infrastructures of place, the economics of place, the regulatory frameworks of place. We have, as I mentioned, we have participative designers.
Can we see another slide? Sorry, I don't want to move your slide. I don't want to see.
Yeah, no, I think we're getting towards the
that's good,
tangible and real.
No, I think and I think that my question I had for you as well in that vein is that in this, where we are now as a society, if we're going to kind of pull through, we're really going to have to collaborate. And there was some great quote, which I've completely forgotten who it was by, but basically, you know, last decade was about egos and this decade is about collaboration. I can't remember who it was, Alain de Botton or someone, I don't know. But, you know, but in terms of COVID as well, you know, it's taking, I don't know all the names of the scientists who are trying to do this, but we all have got to club together in a way to make things work.
Yeah, which, as you say, that articulates that the challenge of the moment, whilst we have to deal with complexity and we need more sort of transdisciplinary stuff. It's not even just two people with different perspectives meeting. The solutions from our world of urbanism and architecture, we recognize, but actually much wider, the challenges that the world faces around the environment and sort of the economy. But COVID is actually, yes, forcing us apart and making this very narrow channel of communication via online platforms. This morning I came into the studio, and it's actually Lynton is in the studio, and the space and the light in the studio, it just seemed much more the kind of that place where big ideas and collaboration can happen. And yes, we're all getting better at using Microsoft Teams or Zoom or whichever one we want, and sharing content online and digitally marking up. But for a studio like ours, which is so kind of deeply, one, both sort of human-centered and two, sort of collaborative, it makes us strongly want to get back into the workspace or the studio environment. And yes, we're all feeling very strained and wearied by the last 6 to 8 months.
So I think that, I mean, just what I think we'll do is stop sharing. And I know that Alex has got a couple of questions for you. But one thing I had noted, if you wouldn't mind, you're just going to go through those. We've got some, lovely to see those. It's just to be nice to see your face as well. Obviously, half a face each. But I think the other thing I was interested in is that Matt Dearlove, who's the director of the design district, the chief designer, he was talking about the fact that you came with VR to show how your projects were going to work. And I have a friend who's one of the directors of Populous, who designs Stadia, and he's been talking about VR and trying to go into VR to have a design process, because he's finding absolutely it's very hard to actually design in Zoom, because you need to kind of be together and write on things. And I was curious to find out how VR worked for you, and just how you, but probably in about sort of 2 minutes, because then Alex is going to ask a couple of questions.
This is another way to represent a space. We did it for Ada, which was
I say technology. Yes, it's a tool, and we've done a lot. And what we see is it can take the drudgery out of the process and allow your interactions to be focused on the really valuable stuff, the synthesis, the somewhat sort of qualitative rather than the quantitative. Computers can process the numbers, great, but that quality of interaction when designing is the key. And to be honest, VR, I think, is a communication tool. It still struggles to be as immediate as being there together and sort of highly iterative synthetic thinking as a group. So maybe I'm just being a Luddite, but just like the affordance of a pen and a piece of paper, there's an immediacy to it that I think all these platforms struggle to replicate. So I don't know how we get beyond COVID, but I do think I still have great faith in space and place. And we've had clients who've said, is this the end of the office? I think as a sort of a back office administrative function, maybe, as a place to be creative.
Just like overhearing like indie or you chat about stuff is, just the background tacit information coming into your ears. That's it. Which you don't really get on a formal meeting. Like, I turn this on to talk to someone about a specific thing.
It's as everybody says, it's the coffee moment. It's when you have an opportunity to talk kind of off the record. For me, I find it's Zoom meetings. You need to have an after Zoom meeting, because there's quite often stuff that comes up in the Zoom meeting that you then need to discuss with a few amount of other people, but that's just sort of not possible. I don't know. Anyway, it's really frustrating.
I worked on like the hub workspaces. They're all about those kind of tactics of how to make those situations occur. So those things, all those sort of things we tried out, go onto all of our buildings, really.
Okay.
I know you've got 2 questions.
This might backfire this, but I'm just thinking from VR to IRL, because I'm up on the 3rd floor and I can move through this door here to actually look at the building, which I think is quite cool.
Yeah, look at that. That looks so great.
You see that?
Fantastic.
I'm intrigued as to whether the basketball court and the need to keep the balls inside inspired the mesh that goes right the way down the building. Did you get that?
Yeah.
Is that true?
Which came first?
Which came first?
The basketball or the mesh? We found that one of Lynton's sort of narratives is most of the decisions we make aren't for one reason. They're optimized if they can actually be the resolution of a number of factors. So we're constantly plagued by window cleaning strategies or balustrades or
solar shading,
lots of details of architecture where if you can synthesize something that without kind of making your design intent unclear can solve it, great. And the mesh does do all those things, and actually it has this sort of very subtle diaphanous nature. You can read the legibility of the building as the floor plates, but people aren't going to fall off them, so that's a big plus side. It can stretch over. It can now contain the basketballs. It can kind of create that sort of almost aviary kind of space over the staircases. So it would be good to say it's there because, but actually it's always more complicated than that.
Yeah.
It's an there is a final element to it that actually in our age of this sort of Instagrammable, I think there will be something very extraordinary about standing on that precipitous edge and the immediacy of being on the edge of a building to a public realm that I think is uncommon. I don't think that relationship exists in architecture very often, and I'm sure people react strongly to it.
Another thing we always try and do is try and create a sense of ownership in buildings. So if you're new to that building, you'll probably be scared to go next to the mesh, but then you can just push someone against it. Like it's that kind of knowledge of like the capabilities of that building. I think brings a good ownership to it. I've showed lots of people around that space, and people love it. They really, I mean, it's extraordinary. I've never seen it on a building before. People really like it. A question. There's quite.
We have one question. No, I was just going to say we have one question from Robert, from Rupert. So I thought we should probably finish with that one.
Yeah, there's a few people that are asking about kind of the evolution of architecture 00, and you mentioned that you showed a picture of what you described as your third generation of thinking. Rupert's interested to find out about what the fourth generation is going to be and what is going to kind of influence that.
Thank you, Alex. That's one for the 1 minute left. It's great.
Yeah, I think, say, the deep values we hold don't change overnight. So the idea of the platform, the affordance of it, the creating the opportunity. I say on the project in Swansea, we're kind of engaging more deeply in, therefore, the sort of the environmental sort of active strategies of that. I think we recognise as architects with what's currently going on with the global environment that we need to not just have low energy in performance, but embodied energy. Most of the buildings we're designing now are BREEAM excellent and pushing towards outstanding, but that's largely focused on the energy in use. And now that's so low, proportionately, the energy, embodied energy in construction is high. So how can we now move this into more sustainable, and the familiar aesthetic that maybe will be pigeonholed with is concrete, how can we shed? And I say we're very interested in looking at an entirely timber evolution of this thinking.
Yeah, I think it's a long and process that you're going to go on thinking about for sure.
Yeah, but still the social values and the sort of deeply things I think, yes, hopefully they're sort of those deep commitments that don't change, and possibly in the current sort of political economic context, we'll just have to even focus more tightly on. It is about really maximizing the investments that anyone is making anywhere in the country, and going back to some of your earlier questions, making the local impact of that maximized. So,
I think go local is definitely a part of everybody's thought, because we can't go anywhere else, quite frankly. We are be local. Now I realize it's sort of 2:01, so it's the end of our talk. I'm so happy we do these Friday talks, and thank you so much for coming. There were sort of two things I suppose I took away from that was recognizing human behavior and supporting it. I think that's got to be a key thing for architecture, and also sense of ownership. I think that buildings aren't going to work unless people really feel a sense of ownership. So I'm so looking forward to seeing them in real life and getting to go to them and playing basketball, and the fact that they are going to become a reality. So that's very exciting. I really wanted to thank everybody for coming and taking part in these talks. Obviously we wouldn't be doing them without you, so thank you very much. And just to flag up that 6th of November will be the last talk like this. I'm sure we're going to do other versions, but we're going to be talking with Hannah Corlett from HNNA, And we're going to be looking at the 2 buildings that she's designed for the design district, as well as talking to Matt Dearlove, who's going to give a kind of more overview. So I think that's going to be really interesting. Please come, and otherwise have a very good weekend. I hope you all have great weekends. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thank you.